Hey there, woodworkers. This is part 2 of our small bookshelf, and in this video, we're going to be making the sides. So, I previously labeled the pieces that I rough cut for my sides, so that's what I'm going to start with. Okay, so I've selected my wood and I've cross-cut it to my rough length. Now we're going to run it through the planer, and we're taking it down to 10 or 11/16 in thickness. Currently, I'm at 1 1/16, so that's what I'm going to set the planer to. Okay, I am getting a pretty good amount of torn grain, so I stopped at 11/16 and I'm gonna finish going to 9/16 on the wide belt sander. Let's see, 11/16 is 0.68, so set 0.68 green. All right, now we're going to head over to the jointer. Okay, we'll check that one for square. It's looking clean. Okay, and that's square as well. So that one's done. Okay, that one's good now as well. So we'll head over to the table saw. Okay, so my plans are telling me that my final width here is 6 1/4. So that's where I will set my rip fence. And I'll be sure to have my jointed edge up against my rip fence as well. Okay, again, we've got some decent sized offcuts, and so I'm going to keep those to the side as well, just in case we need them for something later on. Okay, well, checking in for square. It's very close. Probably good enough. This side's less, so I'm gonna give this one a check mark, and we'll cut the other end off. Let me check this board as well. That one's looking square. So we'll take these over to the upcut saw and cut them to final length. Okay, we're setting our upcut saw to 28.5. I'm gonna look for my check mark. So that's my good end that I will put here. Make sure that there's no sawdust in between. Okay, so we have completed milling and squaring our sides. So now it's time for us to start looking at cutting the joinery. Okay, so before we start cutting joinery, we just want to take a look at our board and see if there's an obvious side that we want to put to the inside or outside, or how we want to match up our grain pattern. And it really doesn't matter other than just what you feel the right look is. Okay, so I'm liking both of these. So I want those to be the front, or I want these to be the outside, which would mean that this is the front. Okay. So this is the back, and I'm going to put a little mark, a little carpenter's triangle over here as well. And I'll put a little F for front. Okay. So that's the front, and that's the outside. Okay, which means that this is the inside. So I am going to be setting up a rabbet cut in the inside back corner. So I'm going to go ahead and I like to just draw a little squiggle, and that just reminds me where I'm actually needing to cut off. So it's telling me that this groove is 5/16 deep and 5/16 wide. So when we're setting up a rabbet, we first set up the depth. We get a tooth kind of right in the middle where it's at its high point. And then we can use a little 6-inch ruler and match up that tooth to our 5/16. Then we're measuring from that same tooth on the left side as we bring the fence over. So we're going to be covering up just a little bit of these blades to get our 5/16. Keep in mind that as you tighten the clamp down on the rip fence, it adjusts the whole thing slightly. So make sure that as you clamp it, it is right where you want it to be. Always a great idea to run a scrap piece. And actually, let's do that right now. So this is one of my offcuts from the sides. And so this is a great opportunity to just use this as a scrap piece, test it out, and make sure that we're getting the cut that we want. When I'm cutting rabbets, I like to have 2 platens so that I can always be putting pressure over the blades as the material passes over it. For this cut, I'm just carefully backing out instead of running the whole thing. But now we can take a look and see. And we're right on the money there. And we're right on the money there. So we set it up correctly, but if we had messed up, then we'd know it now. We'd be able to fix that before making a mistake in our sides. Okay, so now I am careful to put that line down towards the blades as we had laid out before. And I'm going to run this rabbet across the whole thing. Okay, that looks great. That's what I'm going for. Okay, now we're going to need to do some layout work for the dados. So I want to reorient these how it's going to go. Okay, so that's my top, this is my front. So as I open this up, my dados are going to be running along here. So as I'm looking at my drawing, it's telling me that my first dado is 3.5 inches from the bottom. Okay, the next one is, the dado itself is a 1/2 inch dado. So then I'll make a little mark for that. A 1/2 inch up for that from that previous line. From that line, it's telling me up an additional 10 inches. So at this point, it's actually nice to have a longer steel ruler. I'm gonna go grab one real quick. Okay, so from my last mark, I'm marking up 10 inches. And from there, another 1/2 inch. And then same thing, from that last line we drew, I'm gonna do another 10 inches. And another 1/2 inch. Which should ideally leave us with 3.5 inches from that top line to the top of the board, and it does, so that means that we did this correctly. Now, if we had a slight mistake, it doesn't really matter as long as our sides match to each other. So now I'm going to take this other side that I hadn't drawn on. I'm going to match these up so they're totally flush on top and bottom. And then I'm just going to transfer each of these lines. So that the marks are at the exact same spot on both boards. Now I'm going to go across each one and transfer those lines just a little bit onto the edges as well. So we can see exactly where these dados are supposed to be. Now that I have those marked, we're going to set up for our dado cut. And I have a sled built for this that we can use. This sled is good for cutting 1/2 inch dados, is what I use it for. And so now we need to measure our blade height, but we need to do it from the floor of the sled instead of the actual table. Okay, double check my plans. These dados are 1/4 inch deep. So I have my blade sticking 1/4 of an inch above the flat part of this sled. What we can do from there is we'll scoot this back, and then if you load one of your shelves in, you can look and see, and that means that your dado will be cut in the right spot. Okay, as I'm using this sled, I usually use a platen and just kind of set it there, and I have my fingers there giving some pressure, making sure that you're butted up against this larger fence. On the backside where there's a hole here, you don't want to have your thumb there. You also want to be aware of where the blades are because you don't want to cut all the way through the sled. Okay, so as soon as that is lined up neatly, I am just going to do one cut. I'm going to push through. I'm going to hear it when it stops cutting. And then I'm going to turn the saw off and let it spin down before I move this out of the way. If I use the sled and I cut and pull back, then it's likely that I'm going to accidentally cut that dado slightly too wide. So we want that dado to be a perfect 1/2 inch. We don't want it to be any excess. Then we'll move along and we'll do that on each of the sides. So now we've got our rabbet and our shelf dados cut. Set that one to the side, cut the dados on my other one. Okay, let's take a look now. All right, now we're cutting some rabbets into the base, which matches with our foot. Let's see, so we need to, let me get this oriented again. Okay, so these are my feet. So again, I'm gonna put a little mark near the bottom just to remind me that that's where I'm cutting it out of. For this one, I think we're just going to use a regular miter gauge instead of the sled. Okay, so we're at 9/16 or maybe just a hair less. We want to leave 3/8. So let's see, 3/8 is 6/16, and we have 9/16. So we want to cut off 3/16, but we want to do it from both sides. So we want 3/32. So that's what I need to set my blade height to. And I think just to be safe, I'll start it at 2 and then I'll double check. I want to match this to my foot. We want, let's see, 1/4 inch. So if I mark a 1/4 inch on here, about right there. Bring up my fence to match it. Okay. I'm gonna use the platen just like before. I have this up against the rip fence just as a measurement stop, and then I'm gonna cut this on both sides of this bottom. Let's see where we're at. Now I'll match it to the foot. Okay, so the side is still just slightly too big, which is a good problem because we can always cut off more. If you cut off too much, then that becomes a small problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to raise the blade about 1/8 of a turn, just not very much. So, you know, probably even less than 1/8 of a turn, just a little bit of a turn so that it's cutting off just a hair more. Okay, and that's fitting just how we want now. So now we'll go ahead and cut the other side. Want to make sure watching for my scribble line so I know which side to cut. Great. That feels nice as well. Okay, our next step is to lay out and work on the top curve on the sides. So I'm going to go ahead and make myself a little tracing form here so that I can get both sides matching. Okay, so from the top down, we're doing 2 inches. And that's kind of the look we're going for. But you could do it however you like. I'm going to go ahead and cut this and sand this, bring it back over, and use this as my tracing form. Okay, so I just used a scrap piece of MDF to do this, and just took me a minute, but now I'm going to line that up and use that as my guide. So I'll have it flush on top, flush on the back. And trace this on. Okay, I'll do that same thing for this. So this is the top front. Okay, now with each of these, I'm going to cut them close on the bandsaw and then finish them off over on the sander. Sometimes it's good to mark it on both sides. That can help when you're sanding as well. All right, let's take these over and cut these down. So again, I'll cut it close on the bandsaw and then finish it on a sander. You know, probably try to stay at least of a 1/16 inch away from that line, but as close to it as I can get. All right, when I'm doing something like this on this sander, I like to, if possible, work this way. If I work this way, then it's a bigger chance that it's going to catch that corner and want to throw it that way. So that's why it's nice to have your traced line on both sides. All right, perfect. So if you've done it correctly, then your pieces should match up nicely to each other. Okay, I've finished making the sides. The last thing that I'll do is go ahead and use a palm sander to sand just the faces. I don't really want to mess with the joinery or the edges yet until it's assembled. So I'll do those, and then I really will be finished with the sides. The next video will show how to make the shelves.